Hello, Wenecwtsin, and welcome to Coming Home, a limited sacred conversation series for the children of the past, the present, and the future. These conversations are hosted and facilitated by Charlene, founder of reGEN Media, and feature the wisdom of Wenecwtsin, whose Indian name passed down to him, Wenecwstin, means big voice that speaks the truth. We invite you to join us for conversations of hope, revival, and of the ancestors we intend to be for those yet unborn.
Wenecwtsin, I am so grateful to you and for our conversations. I deeply appreciate the wisdom and the knowledge transfer of Indigenous teachings that you have been so generous to share with me. And one of the most profound lessons that you've taught me thus far in our friendship is that we can heal ourselves and our families in 3 generations if we choose to keep this a sacred priority.
Chief Wayne, you have talked about building the cognitive life raft, and I'm wondering if you can describe or define or explain what that means when you say that. What is that?
Building a cognitive life raft really means building an understanding. If you ask yourself a basic question, why do I do what I do? And then I think that begins that process of defining, okay, what is it that happened in my life that I'm acting or interacting in this way? What's going on? And you have to build that understanding. And when you go to that place of building understanding, it's like searching in your own history. And you run into these places that are very uncomfortable sometimes. And you have to say, okay, what's that about? And then you say, okay, that's why this happens. You know, I think one of the biggest things as an example is around conflict. When you're dealing with conflict, people go into a fight or flight or freeze mode, which is a traumatic response because of what's happened to them. And I think for my own life, that's kind of what I had to understand about myself. And it didn't happen overnight. This stuff happened for me in my 30s when I was doing work at the Round Lake Treatment Center. We're doing work on the family of origin and just checking out, my family of origin I was in. What are some of the things that were going on for me as a child? Because that defines who we are. The interactions as a child build these memories in our brain, sort of gets wired in a certain way. And so for me, it was really interesting doing that work. Then I left, we were doing professional development around it, and I left that environment and I went home and I had this headache, just a splitting headache. Like I said, what's going on? What's happening with me? Because it just sort of came out of nowhere. And then what I realized, what I did that night is I asked my ancestors again, come help me. I don't understand what's happening. Help me understand what's happening. And that's building a cognitive life raft, asking that question, come and help me. Unseen forces, if you will, or ancestor spirits. You start building an understanding. So in doing that, when I went back the next day into the work we were doing, the professional development, it came to me. What it was an incident that took place with my stepfather when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And there was a conflict situation and I hadn't done something the right way. And he was actually using a hammer and hitting me with it. In that moment, that defined conflict for me and defined a whole series of things around that. I really began to understand that when I got into conflict, I thought I was going to die. And with my wife at the time, we would get into normal relationships. You have conflict, right? You argue and go back and forth. And what would happen for me in conflict with her is I literally would disappear emotionally. Just that wall would go up. And she would look at me right in the eye and say, where did you go? And I'd look back, I said, I'm right here. I'm right here. She says, no, you're not. Where did you go? And that, when I began to understand that this conflict as a child was coming out, I was going into that flight mode. I was running, but emotionally running. And so you just build a little information at a time as you begin to understand it, because, I was trained and taught that your body remembers long before your memory does, your mind does. And so I think that's when you start talking about that cognitive life raft. It's building those little pieces. Like when you put a raft together, you have different pieces. Doesn't come as one. You just build different pieces of it, right? And whatever material is going to work for you. And that's part of sort of that question you ask yourself, well, why do I do what I do? And you construct that life raft, that cognitive life raft, that mental understanding. Then you take the cognitive life raft, and it sort of gets anchored in. Basically, your thinking has to start being altered. You have to have a paradigm shift in your own being, the way your mind is. First seek to understand and then be understood. So that's what we have to do in building that cognitive life raft, first principle. Everything is created twice, first by your thoughts and then by your actions. And that's when you're building the cognitive life raft, that's what you're doing. You're thinking about it first before you actually do it.
So if someone said to you, okay, Wenecwtsin, I think I'm ready to work on this cognitive life raft, and I want to understand like what the steps are. Would you say that the first step is seeking to understand why you do what you do? And the next piece that we're bringing into the life raft is looking at your family of origin, and that might give you some clues. What would you say the third step in that process might be, if those were a couple of the very, very initial steps?
Well, I think the initial steps, like I said, is really, we do what we do and ask ourselves that question. But then our challenge is, how do we take the information that's been given to us and what do we do with it? And that's, we can this is what happened to me as a child, this happened in my family of origin, but what do I do with that now? And it's really about that whole concept of, as an organism, we're always changing and evolving, and we're always learning. And so I've always said that you just keep learning and bring new tools in, because you can't do it alone. Because that's the challenge, is how do you reach out and find other people, like-minded people, or other professionals, spiritual people, whatever that may be for you, and bring those people into your life to help you build that strength and build that raft, build that foundation for where you need to go. And I think that once you've done that work, it's really about finding those different pieces of what's going to work, because the tools that are out there are multiple. And I think that people need to understand they have to start with their thinking first. You're thinking in a certain way, and what you have to do is maybe alter your self-talk, how you talk to yourself. And there's lots of tools out there around the brain, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. It's about how you reprogram your brain, and because it's been hardwired in a certain way. And how do you start reprogramming yourself and reframe everything? So you take something, you look at it, and you don't put all that energy into it. You let that energy dissipate. You take something and look at it and say, well, hey, that's not going to do me harm. And then you build that sort of cognitive thinking part of it, and the thoughts you have and your self-talk. Because a lot of people, unfortunately, they talk to themselves all the time, but what they say to themselves is not necessarily good. And that's the challenge in your own thinking, is how do you build on your own strengths? What are your strengths? There's many different tools to do that, and I think one of the most powerful tools we can use is actual ceremony. Because when you're in fasting, you're in ceremony with yourself, there's nobody else but you. And the term we use in our reGEN is kunulkunchut, help yourself. How do you help yourself? That's the tool when you're building your cognitive life raft. How do you help yourself? Yes, it's your mind, but it's also your body. It's also your spirit, right? It's also your emotion. It's how do you rebuild those pieces of yourself? It's a multitude of things. And so I think we have to be able to respond in that way and look at a multitude of solutions. Because I always say that when people build their own cognitive life raft, mine's going to be different than yours, And somebody from the other side of the world is going to be different than both of ours, right? Because there's a different set of circumstances, a different history. But the interesting part of the Indigenous people, we have a similar colonial history that's impacted us. And we feel a lot of the same type of issues, but our solutions are different because we're unique individuals. It is around educating yourself and utilizing self-talk in your mind as a tool to help you and to work with you, not to fight against you. And it boils down to questions. What questions do you ask yourself? Rather than saying, okay, why this, why that? And you maybe want to ask a different question. Like, what can I do different? How did that happen? And rather than why, because that why question is a never ending, you never get an answer to a why question, but people ask that question all the time. Why did this happen to me? Blah, 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 blah. Rather than saying, okay, this has happened. What do I do about it? What do I need to change? What do I do? What's the action I need to take? What do I need to learn? So ask yourself a different set of questions as you're building your cognitive life raft. The mind is a powerful tool, and we need to learn to use it to our advantage and to our health and well-being. And you'll be amazed how you can turn yourself around by just your thoughts and your words to yourself, your self-talk, because that in itself is a powerful tool that people underutilize, because so much of our self-talk is reacting to outside people telling us what's wrong, not what's right. It's no easy task, I'll be honest with you, because looking at yourself in a mirror sometimes, and it took me a long time to come to that place of looking myself right in the eye and saying, I love you. Mm-hmm. And then I could feel it,
Just even starting to understand what a powerful tool the mind is, and thinking about it as every day I'm building into this life raft. I mean, we get taught when we're young how to build stronger bodies and how to build our biceps and how to do a push-up. But, this is it's fascinating that we don't get taught more about the mind. And
Well, it's interesting. We do in schools, but what they're teaching you is not necessarily what you need to know. If you think about it, when I think about school, I think about it as a place where social interactions are how you learn to be and relate to other human beings. What I learned about history, what I learned about geography, all of those things, they're relevant in some ways, but no, it is really about the interaction with human beings. And you started in the lower grades and you build those relationships. And I think that's the tool. And how does that frame your sort of interaction with the world, is through those relationships? Because they say that everything you need to learn, you learn in kindergarten. And kindergarten is about learning boundaries, about learning what's not yours, is learning to clean up after yourself. So all these little tools, right? And that stuff can last you a lifetime, in terms of what it does for you. So I think we have to be mindful that education systems are designed in a certain way, and as we know, it's not telling the full, true history of who we are as a people. With the reconciliation and the historical impacts of colonization, that's not taught. But we know it's there because we feel it, we experience it still today. So I think that's the process of the mind. I think why we're such in a mind meld in so many ways is because of the impact that those children 215 had when they revealed themselves to the world. We all, as Indigenous people, were impacted, coast to coast to coast, all over Turtle Island. It's like, it gave that collective sort of, this really happened. And then and the question I then asked, well, what are we going to do about it now? Had a real traumatic impact for me, right? I went into a state of shock, really. I lost a week of time because my mom attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and I just started thinking about her and what she must have endured and the fact that she made it. And I just went through all of those things, and it really had an impact on me. And I had to turn that around and say, what do I do with this now? We weren't looking for pats on the back and people saying they're sorry. We wanted people to learn the truth, the ugly truth of Canada. Because our people, especially the people that went to these institutions, that never felt they were heard, never felt that their story was truly told. They were never listened to, and they were told they were drunks, they were told they were this, they were told they were that, Think about what that does to that person, right? That's that shift. We have to take that shift and build that cognitive life. This happened. Question is, okay, what do we do about it? That's how you reframe it, right? Change can happen in an instant. It doesn't take forever. That's what people don't realize. It takes too long to change things. You change your mind every minute.
So I'm curious if you had one wish or one, like, a bit of wisdom for especially, maybe children or younger people or younger parents, just again, knowing what you know now about this work and how important it is to think about things differently, knowing what you know now, if you had one wish or one bit of wisdom that you'd want to share about the cognitive life raft, or what you hope people take from it, especially for families, I'm going to say, what would that be?
I really think about it in this context is people need to always remember who they are and where they came from. Because that in essence, when you think and you have a thought, come to the realization, we have literally thousands of years in our blood. That's where we come from. That's who we are. And it situates us in a unique place on this earth because we were put in places to look after the land and do things. And everything that's happened to us has impacted that. So the lesson really is that parents need to let their children be children and let them be who they're going to be. Really just have that experience of experiencing everything and let them know who they are, where they come from, their language, their culture, the traditions, the ceremonies, because that connection is so important. If they know the land and they know the water, where they come from, they'll never, ever feel they're alone. And I think that's part of what happens with young families and young people. They feel alone. Their ancestors walk with them all the time. And even people that haven't been, quote, living in our communities, they need to know this because they're still connected. They have a blood connection, and they always this thing, in some ways they feel lost because they don't feel connected. And I think we have to help them connect, and I think connection in today's world can mean many different things, but it's helping people know and understand who they are and where they come from. Because that builds the strength in the family. When all the family knows who they are and where they come from, the children aren't displaced from their aunts and uncles and their community and their nation. That'll grow in such a way that it builds us. It builds strength in our nation, builds strength in our communities, and builds strength in our family. They tried to erase us from the history of this country, erase us from the land. And I think that that'll never, ever happen as long as you remember who we are and where we come from.
Thank you for joining us for Coming Home. This episode was brought to you by reGEN Media, the first and only Indigenous-owned and female-led wraparound ecosystem that facilitates the creation, funding, and distribution of regenerative media projects through a relational filmmaking model. Together, we aspire to turn the page from the last, darker chapter of our history to the next, more hopeful and empowering chapter. Visit us again next time for more shared wisdom, knowledge, and another conversation. For more information about Coming Home, reGEN Media, Wenecwtsin, and more, visit reGENimpactmedia.com. Until next time, puru and goodbye.